Everyone, thanks so much for joining us for this latest session. We are going to be diving in with Brad Smith, who is one of the co-founders of uSERP. And we're going to dive into the topics that we are all really excited and curious about today, AI and its impact on marketing. We're going to cover a couple different angles. We've all been talking about AEO, GEO. I know there's a lot of topics around that, and even that category is still kind of being defined. We're also going to dive into agents, right? How are we deploying agents? And just at a high level, how can we as marketers integrate AI into our strategies and become more effective? Brad, thanks for being on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jorge. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive in. You talk about the pragmatic AI marketer. Why do smart marketers build AI into these operational systems and help them sort of scale and be more effective as time progresses?
Yeah, I think it's about really understanding what it's both good and bad at. And so a couple of years ago, the problem was like adoption. The problem is no longer adoption in that everyone, all of us are using it daily. The challenge or issue is that if you don't have good operational systems, if you don't have a lot of good instructions, skills, files, if you're not basing it off of very specific, personalized information or inputs effectively, all it's doing, or a lot of times what it's doing, is just creating all these unintended consequences because it's just scaling inefficiency, it's scaling generic stuff, there's not enough guardrails in place typically, and that's often where we see both like the good and the bad, if that makes any sense. It's just like adding fuel to the fire on something. If you don't really understand kind of what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it, and then use it in a very specific way, it can often backfire.
What are some of the examples around setting up operational infrastructure, that structure, like for the folks out there who are going, okay, cool, what does that mean for my day-to-day, and what tools or sort of mechanisms should I leverage to be able to set that up?
For sure. Depends a little bit, obviously, on the scale of the company. So an enterprise company is going to have like totally different probably concerns or issues than a startup might. Typically, though, what we find is that what people are trying to do is rely on AI to do too much of the stuff that they should be doing first. And so I like to say that AI is really good at like getting something from 25% to 75%. Mm. The gap is on the front end and the back end. So the gap on the front end is often the boring stuff. It's like really developed ICPs. It's really specific style considerations. It's really specific, like one very narrowly defined problem that you're trying to solve in that one case at one time, before you then start trying to like link other agents together at the same time. And keeping a human in the loop. And you can think of it as sort of like a sandwich in that respect, of having like a human kind of both like guiding things on the front and on the back end. That way, what you're able to do in an ideal world is avoid all the other problems that can spin out of it. So not just things like claims being made that aren't accurate, but a lot of the other like very problematic issues, especially when it comes to on the SEO and GEO and AEO side, where you see this like content debt problem over the last year or two, where people just, especially startups, were very good at pumping out like hundreds of articles or hundreds of content pages, but there wasn't really a lot of thought put into like, not just like entities and schema, let alone that, but also like how unique or personalized or branded any of that information was, whether or not it was the right content at the right time, whether or not you had internal linking figured out. Like there was a lot of other like gaps in the process because it's so easy to just apply speed and efficiency at like a moment's notice effectively.
And when you speak to AI, are we talking ChatGPT, Claude? Is it like, are we talking about like one of the initial use cases, just literally going in there, putting prompts in, having conversations and that kind of stuff? Or are we talking about just like literally operationalizing agents to execute certain jobs to be done?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because in my view, it's like a stair step almost, of like if you can't get it right in like a basic use case, then linking it together with agents is just going to make the problem worse, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So really, it kind of goes all the way back to the beginning and the basics of like, when we talk about a persona or an ICP, like who is this thing for? Whether we're doing whether we're trying to get the output to be ad copy, emails, sales enablement messaging, like prospecting emails, like whatever it is. Do you really understand these people as well as you think you do? So go beyond like, useless information like demographics. Like what does their day-to-day look like? What are their pain points? What is their company struggling with or their industry struggling with? What's the most recent news impacting them? What are who do they report to? And what is that person's like primary objectives and goals? Once we figured that out, okay, cool. Now about your brand specifically, what's differentiated about it? What's unique about it? What are the messaging themes? Most companies, most startups have different types of customers or different types of verticals or industries they're targeting. So you then need to like multiply that effort across all of these. And the reason I'm going into depth on all this kind of stuff is like using a language model like ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever in one case or one time is fine. Where you really start to see like the value from it though is using something like a little bit more powerful like Claude or something where you can start building out agents. You can start building out very specific skills. You can start building out very specific skills in the case of Claude for one very specific type of marketing project you're working on. And often I find trying to apply, and this is like more of an operational mindset, but I find the best outputs, the best outcomes often come from thinking in this like assembly line fashion. Where you have an agent that does research that's already pre-populated with all this really like granular detail. Then you have one that's doing the creative or creating. Then you have another one that's doing the QAing. And you really need to make sure that these like agents, let alone like a single model, is really using like first person insight. And often that's not documented well enough or specific enough.
Yeah. So we saying like start with the basics, like literally pop open a spreadsheet, start to ideate in there, populate values, work on that, have the meetings, all the stuff that we've been doing for 100 years. Well,
yeah.
I don't think we had spreadsheets for 100 years, but
no, unfortunately, yeah, it sounds basic and dumb and annoying because no one wants to do it because we're all marketers and we like doing the fun stuff, not the like boring stuff. But for example, like if again, just pick pick a blog article, pick one article. There's so many things that need to go into that to make it really come out well, especially if you're relying on something that doesn't understand effectively what it's talking about. Like you really need to be intentional about like the inputs you're providing it and or the instructions, the files, the skills that it's using or it's being told to use to interpret and then make decisions that aren't going to want you to like, I don't have any hair left, but make you pull your hair out afterward. Because everybody's been in that case where they've had to like edit an article or an email 10 times, or it takes like 2 extra weeks. And we thought that it was, that AI was going to help us. And then we're spending all this cleanup tax, I call it. It's like all this additional work after the fact. And what that means is the inputs, the stuff on the front end, all this boring stuff we're talking about, it wasn't properly aligned. And that's where the like extra editing comes from, or the redos or the problems like later on down the line.
Yeah. It really resonates deeply with me. I've been noticing as I've continued to scale, and I have Claude and I use ChatGPT. I actually use them both in parallel and I have subscriptions to both, which is crazy because I would never have two essentially competing tools, but I find that sometimes one works better than the other. As an example, I've been working on a deck all day and I'm going in, the user experience is actually not optimized for like iteration in a clean way. It's very, very interesting. Like I'll go back and I just want to iterate on one slide and then it changes all 15 slides every time. And I'm just like, no, keep the 15. And then, it's still, I think a little more collaborative than, dealing with 2 or 3 other people like in the past. But it's a very nuanced thing. I think it does actually force me to be a little more disciplined, and it also forces me to probably do a little better work. Like in the past, I used to just like go through slides quickly and I just want to get them over with.
Yep.
Right. And so this does allow me to go through those iterations. There's no way I would have gone through like 10 iterations of a basic slide deck in the past. And so it does force me to do that. But to your point, like there is a little bit more work when I don't have some of these guardrails set up. What advice would you give marketers about starting to set up maybe kind of a list or a framework of guardrails that they can get ahead of?
For sure. Yeah. One, a very common one I see is we could say brand voice, or if it's a startup, especially, it could just be like your voice. And what I'm talking about is style. So what you should not do, especially in like when we're talking about written, text, what you should not do is be like, hey, whatever, ChatGPT, make this more emphatic or something. It's just going to keep giving you like randomness. What you should be doing is dropping it URLs, dropping it podcasts like this of us sitting here talking, and then being like, hey, help me analyze what my voice and tone should be or could be based on these very specific examples that I'm giving you already of literally me sitting here talking or us sitting here talking. Then it becomes really useful, because then it starts to give you like an output, like a document where it has like a full brand voice broken out, and it's being trained on your exact information. So that output now becomes like one like small atom, like one small piece of a future input for a bunch of other projects. So another one's going to be like brand messaging overall. So in other words, like, your product or service, like what does it do? What is an alternative to your jobs to be done point earlier? Like what is the actual differentiation? What's the positioning? Same idea. Like, hey, here's a bunch of stuff we're doing, or I'm trying, and this is where I think AI is super helpful. You could sit there and keep prompting it and keep telling it like, oh, well, even if you give it like a website to use, or I like to use, whether it's Claude or with Manus, where like I'm using a model that I can also use a browser specifically, and I can go to like websites or go to URLs and pull a bunch of stuff down. I want to be like, hey, what do you think, or what do you analyze based on these resources? And then it'll give me its response, and then I tell it, okay, cool. Like, I agree with these things, I don't agree with these things, or I'm trying not to do these things. How should I change, or how should I modify what I'm trying to say based on if trying to achieve this output or this objective ultimately? And the same idea. So you start by doing this approach. This is where like the iteration I think is very useful early on, is because all of a sudden you can get like 5, 10 like key resources, key documents that then again become the future of what like your skills should be and could be for any form of, like, again, in this case, written text. Design is I think I don't know. People smarter than me probably know better than I do, but I feel like language models are just not awful, not as good at design and graphics as they are at text. So I think you're always just gonna have that challenge of, again, same idea. Hey, let me have a designer build me all these resources. Like, what should our production design look like for a blog post? What should featured images look like? Like, create me all the containers, create me all the assets for it, like someone who's good. Then feed that into it. That 25 to 75% point though, like you're still gonna have to make a bunch of changes. You're still gonna have to like tweak it. You're still gonna have to be like, oh, this one specific thing doesn't look good. What I often do with graphic stuff, or like a deck you're talking about in that example, when I could tell it's getting good enough and I don't want it to keep screwing up everything else that it's already done.
Yeah.
That's when I'll take it into like Google Slides.
Yeah.
Make my own edits and changes, then feed it back in and be like, okay, now give me feedback based on like the changes I've done. Or conversely, I'm looking at the slides on one side and I'm like, hey, I'm just trying to rewrite this specific copy. Just rewrite this copy. Don't touch the slides you already did. Don't touch anything else. Just like, that's where you have to be like, where you have to really balance the precision of what you're trying to do with like a human or expert's perspective. Yeah,
totally. Let's talk a little bit about agents, because I think we're really struggling with setting up agents. Despite what folks on LinkedIn might be saying, right? I think the vast majority of folks are still trying to figure it out. Have worked with many great startups over the last couple years, certainly in the last 2 years or so, and I don't know anyone who has like agents automating the entire marketing team, right, or sales team or whatnot. I still see humans doing the vast majority of things. And so if you were to have to tell a CMO, or I know there's this whole marketing engineer or go-to-market engineer that's touching marketing stack stuff. If you had to tell them, kind of like give them some advice around how to start to think about setting up some basic agents and the types of tasks that they should start to experiment with, what are those basic agents and the tasks?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think of like marketing specific examples, but as a general rule, it's often easier to start with something that's like really well defined and a little bit more black and white. AI is not always great at subjectivity or nuance. So if you're trying to do something, this is why it struggles sometimes on the creative side. Is if you're trying to, I'm trying to think of a marketing specific example. Let's see. If we're trying to do an article or a blog post, what you really want to do is break that down into like the 10 components that go into a good, in air quotes, article. Often the issue is the first problem we've been already discussing of like, no one really kind of knows like what that is or what that looks like. But then you break it down and you're like, okay, well, if we're talking about SEO, GEO, like what's the search intent? What's the potential AI search implication or not? What's the actual content type or funnel stage? What are our headline variations we like? What are our hooker angles we like? Be very explicit then about how long they should be. Giving examples, like good example, bad example. And you have to make things like as black and white as possible. And that's generally speaking where you see more success and you help avoid that like editing tax after the fact, or like the redo tax after the fact. Agents are tricky in marketing, especially because just marketing is not black and white. Yeah. I feel like it's not that customer support's always black and white either, but like if you think of like the first layer of customer support, it is a little bit more like if the person's question is this, then the answer is this. Or if the person and marketing related activities and tasks aren't always that they don't always lend themselves as well to some of these types of activities. With agents too, the other big concern I have, or the other big concern I see typically when we're using it internally or talking to companies about it, is they're trying to have them do too many things, and they're trying to automate too much in the sense of like having it go from one agent to another without a person involved QAing or making changes or giving feedback. And so to me it's a little bit too much of a rush because it's fun. It's a little bit too much of a rush to automate something that hasn't really been thought through and nailed down and really made specific enough so that, again, going back to this black and white conversation of like binary, like it needs to be yes or no. And the more you can drill down or take a function and a role and the activities that are common and recurring in nature, and then the individual tasks or subtasks that make up those things, until you get to that level, it becomes difficult to use it like to the degree where you start seeing a lot of the value unlocked.
Yeah. I don't know if you know Scott Brinker he formerly of HubSpot, and he has the SmartTech Lumascape type thing, and he does a lot of research. And one of the things that I saw in one of his latest reports was that the number one use case for AI was for marketers, was content creation. And, I've thought a lot about, okay, well, how do I create a bunch of agents to not just write me my, let's just call it LinkedIn posts, but then like automate, do the magic, right? Automate the entire posting and the whole nine. And I feel like I still haven't figured that out. Part of me is also hesitant because I don't, I'm gonna, like, I just don't trust. I'm gonna freak out a little bit if I see a post out there that was not in my voice, or there was hallucination and these sort of things. Have you seen like that specific workflow? I mean, I know that's a big one now for us in B2B, but have you seen that particular workflow automated?
Yes, it's very hard. Like, it's funny. I've seen the same studies, or the same other studies echoing the same thing. Content creation is always the first thing that tries to, or has like the highest AI adoption, let's call it, for lack of a better word or phrase. But it's almost funny in a way, because it's almost like one of the hardest things to do with AI, because of all this thing, because it's subjective, because content is subjective at the end of the day. And we see, again, we saw this, and we see this with when we use, actual human writers. It's funny that we have to like differentiate now between like,
yeah, I know, right? Well, we're
with,
living in a sci-fi movie. I mean, we've
wild,
been the last 4, 5, 6 years, right?
I can't tell you the number of times though we have like multiple clients in the same space, and one client loves this writer, one client hates that writer, and they love this other writer that the other client hates. And it's like, well, they're both, we like them equally. Like, they're both good. What's the difference? It's that person's opinion, or those people's opinion and subjectivity, which isn't a bad thing. It just is very, what I'm trying to illustrate here is it's like, it's very specific to like what those people are, who those people are, the founder's like DNA, or the founder's voice and point of view on things. And so this is why it's so hard to do. Where I've seen it work well is, again, you got to be, it's a multi-staged approach of having all this brand stuff that we talked about earlier, or having all this like internal documentation earlier. But then it's you have to have like something doing research, only research. Don't do anything else. Just do research. And here's specifically how we want you to research things. Go to Reddit, grab all the comments. Like you got to be really, really, really specific on how you want it to research the future resource that your actual writing agents is going to use. And the writing agent needs to have all this nerdy stuff in there, like the voice, the tone, the structure of the content. Then your QA agent, we have a quality score effectively for content that we then have to check it against. And then we take the output from that QA one, or that editor, and we give it back to the writer one. And we're like, hey, here's your feedback now. And this is just like one sort of narrowly defined workflow I'm giving you right now of like research, create, edit, or QA, for lack of a better, again, phrase. You often need to customize that based on like each content type you're trying to do. So the instructions, the skills, the files for that are going to be slightly different depending on if we're talking about a long form article, if we're talking about like an investigative style research report, if we're talking about a white paper, if we're talking about, why? Because the way you structure a white paper, you don't have to worry about search intent. You don't have to worry about people also ask questions. You don't have to worry about, but in a white paper you have to worry about, or an ebook you have to worry about, like, I don't know, if it's created for like one, speaking of B2B, if you're creating it for like one ICP and one industry or vertical, you got to have like, it needs to be trained on that specific vertical, that specific ICP, for that content type with that content structure. And this is why it's hard, is because you can do it. You just almost need to have like different workflows for different content types, and each one needs to be slightly different. And it's still a lot of work, and it's like the fun and frustrating thing at the same time.
Do you have a preferred tool for setting up agents? For example, the research agent, right? I know there is Dharmesh Shah's company. He's of course he's the co-founder, CTO at HubSpot, but he's got this agent.ai, I think it is, where there's these like little, they look like micro apps, but they're actually agents, right? That execute certain functions. So it's interesting when you talk about kind of the model that you recommend, which is using an agent to execute one specific task. That's kind of the way that he's architected it. But yeah, back to my question, do you have any preferred sort of tools out there that folks could start to kind of get started with or start to experiment?
Yeah, I think I think the good news is the tool matters less than some of this other stuff we're talking about. So you could do everything I'm describing right now. You can do with pretty much all the major ones. The challenges often become like organization adoption is an issue or a problem sometimes. So
Yeah.
the stuff is
Change
collaborative.
management stuff.
Yeah, totally. The
Yeah.
stuff is collaborative. The stuff too, and governance is a separate sort of issue that we haven't really touched on, but we can. It's also cross-departmental sometimes. So if I'm trying to create content or do something that is also going to set up a sales team, I need to make sure that I'm looping them in or talking to them and figuring out what they're doing and how they're working on stuff. So it kind of comes back to these boring operational conversations. It's like, hey, whatever we're setting up here needs to work like across these teams that need to work together. Product team, like we all need to kind of be able to. If I'm in Manus, which is also really cool, Facebook tried to buy them or Meta tried to buy them, and it may not happen now for geopolitical issues above my pay grade.
No way.
But like
I thought they closed the deal.
They did, and then I don't know. It might be getting unwound effectively. Wow. I don't know. I just saw that on Reddit. Maybe
I wouldn't be surprised with today's.
Yeah, moment. I don't know all the details, but Manus is really cool. One team could use Manus. Another team uses Claude. Both have skills as functionality.
Yeah.
The way you write skills in them are different. And this goes back to the same sort of problem then. It's well, if I'm trying to create something for the other team or they're trying to create something for me, how do we make sure that like we're all speaking the same literal language and AI language, you know?
Yeah.
And so often like it's often what I find, it's kind of like what's the best project management tool to me? It's like it's the one that everyone wants to use.
Yeah.
That's more of the problem to me anyway, as opposed to like everyone has to use Claude or everyone has to use Model X. It's kind of like, well, how can we make sure that like the work we're doing together is going to be harmonious or aligned properly to help cut out all the potential problems when something looks good at first pass and then someone else reads it and they're like, this is totally off base, you know?
Yeah. Sounds like the SaaS world. We were trying to get systems to talk to each other, right?
Yeah, we're moving CRM systems because my co-founder Jeremy and I are like, hey, I can't see when someone books a call with you, but they're trying to book it with me. And then we look at like I'm not gonna like call the tools out, but I'm like, this calendar app doesn't integrate with this tool because I think they're trying to like sell the same thing, and so they purposely don't want to integrate with that one. And then now he and I are like unhappy with both tools because we're like, we just can't. We have no idea if someone's booked a call or booked it with you, and it's the same problems, you know. It's just it's just manifesting in a slightly different way.
Awesome, Brad. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom on really leveraging AI within your organization, particularly the marketing organization. I wanted to wrap up with the topic of governance. How do you start to think about governance as a CMO, as a leader of an organization?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I feel like it's all over the map right now. But governance to me is like accountability effectively. And I don't mean accountability in like a draconian way of like who gets fired when whatever, some like faux pas happens on social because of AI or something like that. It's really like who is in charge of what. And I think there's no better conversation to like end it with than in like the GEO, AEO, or AI search space. No one can agree on what to call it in the first place.
Yeah.
Second off,
I heard AIO today.
I can't keep up. I can't. I started defaulting to AI search because I gave up on trying to like figure out which acronym means what.
Totally. I think we might land at AI search, but anyways.
And then eventually it'll just be search again. That's the funny. It'll just be like search, and search will have multiple flavors, you know. Yeah. But it's like, well, who owns that? Who owns? In some teams, some departments, it's the SEO person. But in other cases, often like you see the best success from a company perspective on the brand side, or when the brand team has like a heavy influence over what's happening there. Because often it's like often brands, especially B2B apps or whatever, are showing up in like really bottom of funnel. queries, searches, comparisons, prompts. Like, it's not like the days of like high level, top of funnel, and then having Gemini or ChatGPT or anything recommend a brand specifically, and anyone seeing that or clicking on or remembering it. So then it's like, well, so should the brand team be involved then? And it's like, well, yeah. And it's like, okay, well, what if someone Google's or Gemini's pricing? Oh, well, who owns pricing? Like, neither one of those two teams or people. Often you got to loop in then like product marketers or product managers, and this is that governance accountability problem. It's like it doesn't matter per se like who owns what. It's just the fact that like we need to all agree on the same things and have the same sort of guardrails or mentality in mind. So when, and I've been in these conversations with enterprise companies where C-suite is like, hey, AI keeps giving me incorrect pricing. And then it's SEO's fault, right? And then you go look at it and you're like, well, no one actually mentions pricing anywhere on the website. The only people that do are like aggregators and competitors and Reddit comments. So there's a bigger problem here than just like SEO isn't doing their job around pricing. It's like getting all the seats at the table, so to speak, and people to come together and figure out, okay, who's going to own what and how are we going to collaborate and complement each other to make AI search effective. Ultimately, it's a more like org-wide problem often than it is just like an SEO problem on its own.
It's so interesting because AI has created this dynamic now where everyone can leverage it, right? I mean, from engineers to brand teams through SEO, through sales reps, right? Everyone's on it, and the insight that it can provide can impact each stakeholder, which can have a drastically different function within the company. So super, super interesting. Brad, thank you so much for being on the show. Really, really appreciate it. I know you're tuning in from beautiful Hawaii. I'm jealous. If folks wanted to get in contact with you, potentially hire you to help them with their marketing efforts, or just follow you and learn from you, what are the best channels or URLs to reach you?
Yeah, uSERP is uSERP.io, which made a lot of sense in traditional SEO days, but maybe less now. Maybe there's a rebrand at some point. So uSERP, we do digital PR, link building, SEO content, a lot of all this stuff that we're talking about and describing right now. Also on LinkedIn, although I'm not always very active at BS Marketer, and my co-founder Jeremy is a lot more active than I am, and a much better example of how to do marketing properly. Jeremy Moser on LinkedIn too.
Awesome. Well, shout out to Jeremy. I know he's an awesome dude, and have a great day.
Thanks, you too.